So Star Wars has become a pretty divisive topic over the past few years. Surely nothing will go wrong with this video, right? This will be a ranking of all 11 live-action Star Wars films. I'm not including any of the shows or series because that's a lot of content to go through, and I'm not including the Clone Wars movie because I refuse to watch it again. Honestly, if you really want to know where it goes on the list, it'd probably be number 12. Before I begin, I need to say something that I think is very relevant to the Star Wars community right now. My opinion that I'm about to present in this video is not the correct opinion. It is just mine. If you have a different opinion, you are 100% allowed to keep that opinion. Don't let anyone tell you that you shouldn't like or dislike a movie if you like or dislike it. That being said, I'm going to share my opinion about these movies, and it's probably going to get really hectic. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to hate you if you dislike my favorites or like my least favorites. That's super petty. Anyways, without further ado, here is my ranking. Everyone knows that Disney obviously didn't have a plan with this trilogy, but I'm kinda convinced that they didn't have a plan as they were writing this movie. Every single step that the characters made was followed by something that either undoes what just happened or somehow makes it so that it doesn't matter. Oh no, C-3PO's memory was wiped. Nah, R2-D2 just restored it. Just don't pay attention to that one line where they said his memory backups were very unreliable. Oh no, Chewbacca died. How sad. Just kidding, he was on the other transport. Don't mind the fact that Finn saw Chewie get on the transport and pointed to the one that he saw Chewie get in, and that's the one that blows up. Nah, Finn just didn't see right. He was on the other one. Every single decision made in this movie is made just so they can get to a point where they retcon The Last Jedi. It is not a movie. If it were a movie, it would care about the story, character consistencies, proper foreshadowing, and other basic filmmaking qualities that make a movie a movie. But this movie had one goal and one goal only: retcon The Last Jedi. Usually with films that I dislike with this much of a passion, I can pinpoint at least one thing that I like about it. One thing that stands among the rubble of a cinematic experience and say, hey, at least it's got that. But with this film, there's actually a few things that I thought they did pretty well. Obviously, I don't have a problem with any of the acting, special effects, or anything like that. C-3PO is probably the funniest he's been in this movie. There's a lot of lines that he says that actually made me laugh out loud, even when I knew they were coming.
I just had an idea of something else we could try.
Oh, boy.
Speaking of which, Babu Frick is the best character in all of Star Wars, and it's such a shame that this is the movie he's in. But most importantly, I think what they did with Kylo and Leia was really well done. Obviously, making Leia a Jedi to retcon this garbage from The Last Jedi was dumb, but it at least allowed for them to do something that almost felt like it was planned for the entire trilogy. Ben sees a force projection of Han Solo, who convinces him to join the light side after his mother dies. But Leia doesn't fade into the afterlife like all the other Jedi until Ben's journey is complete, because his journey to the light side was the last thing that would make Leia complete. Hey, you know what? Maybe this movie isn't that bad.
I'm the spy.
What the fuck? Nowhere in this entire trilogy was there even a hint that a spy existed until the beginning of this movie. And General Hux was the only true villain that was still alive in this trilogy. What possibly could have been his motivations?
I don't care if you win. I need Kylo Ren to lose.
Wow, what a lazy and vague way to just throw this super passionate and intimidating character into the garbage. It really feels like the only reason that this happened was because the writers wrote themselves into a corner by having Poe, Chewie, and Finn get caught by the stormtroopers, and they just didn't know where to go from here. So yeah, Hux is the spy. That makes total sense, so long as you didn't watch the last two movies. This twist is honestly just as bad as Axelrod from Cars 2. The motivations are non-existent, as well as any hint toward the twist. Heck, I could even make the argument that this is worse, because at least with Axelrod, the idea that an evil mastermind hiding among the characters was something that was established quite early on in that movie. The twist was stupid, but it doesn't feel like it was just pulled out of thin air to fit their broken script like it does with this movie. And Hux immediately dies after this. This movie turned the only consistent villain in this trilogy into an illogical ex machina in just 3 minutes. But hey, at least this movie has General Pryde, a brand new evil general who didn't exist in the last two movies and is quite obviously only in this movie to make up for the lack of intimidating villains. The fact that they had to have written this movie after the backlash for The Last Jedi means that they had under 2 years to complete this entire movie. I'm very convinced that they just went with the first rough draft of this script and rolled with it. That would explain why this movie feels not like a movie and why certain things just completely get forgotten about, like what was Finn gonna tell Rey. But this movie doesn't care about that. It doesn't give a crap about being a movie that tells a well-rounded story. It doesn't give a crap that it's the last movie in the trilogy. All it cares about is undoing the deadly sins of The Last Jedi. But even then, they still failed to do that at some parts. Just listen to what their explanation for the Holdo maneuver was.
We need to put some Holdo maneuvers. Do some real damage.
Come on, that move is 1 in a million.
That's it? That's all you're gonna tell us about that? You could have said something like, oh, our ships don't have the hyperdrive capability, or ever since Holdo did that thing, the First Order has new technology that can defend against Holdo maneuvers. But no, instead you gave us this vague line of dialogue that tells us absolutely nothing. Like, as someone who has written a story before, there were times where I would write in the notes of a paragraph, elaborate more here. I would be willing to bet money that they had a note like this in the margins of the script and they just never got around to it. And the scene with Luke was some of the most pretentious and useless garbage ever. I mean, maybe I'm a little biased because I think the criticism to Luke in The Last Jedi is super dumb, and I'll get to that when we talk about that movie, but seriously, there was no point to the scene other than to have Luke catch the lightsaber because look, he's undoing his sinful past from Star Wars and The Last Dragon. Just ignore the fact that he kinda already did that at the end of that movie by going to save the Resistance. Dude, and I haven't even mentioned the elephant in the room yet. Palpatine returning retcons like the entire original trilogy, and it's so painfully obvious that they only threw him in because they got rid of the big bad guy of this trilogy prematurely and they were running out of ideas on how to make this movie work. So they were just like, yeah, let's ditch the entire plot set up by The Last Jedi and go with this super convenient and childlike scavenger hunt plot. Because of the fact that this movie is one giant incohesive mess, none of the emotional moments that tried so desperately hard to be like Endgame and Return of the Jedi hit, because they've rewritten these characters like 3 times now. We don't even know who they are anymore. I understand that a lot of people didn't like the direction The Last Jedi went, and I get that everyone wants something as close to them as Star Wars to be consistent. But my question is, at what cost is that worth? I am certain that whatever script they had before people criticized The Last Jedi could not have been any worse than this pretentious, lazy, and insulting mess of a film. This film that had to have elements of it retconned after it came out because it makes absolutely zero sense. This film that ends with a Rey and Ben Solo kiss. Not only is this super weird because for the longest time these two were theorized to be cousins, but like also because they technically are cousins. This movie is an embarrassment to the Star Wars franchise. It is an embarrassment to the film industry, and it is an embarrassment to storytelling. The Rise of Skywalker can burn in hell. I was really hoping to like this movie upon rewatch because I remember thinking it was really funny as a kid. And for the first 15 minutes, it is pretty funny, but then it just gets super boring. I'm so tired, man. I literally don't care about what's happening. Up until this point, all of the Star Wars films that have been released were really exciting and unique plot lines with high stakes. The plot of this movie is trade politics. Obviously, with such an interesting plotline like that, I was devastated when they went to Tatooine and spent an hour trying to win a pod race. Dude, I don't know about you, but I'm having the time of my life right now. Okay, I'll admit the lightsaber fight at the end was pretty cool, but other than that, I was severely bored for 2 hours and 10 minutes. And it's not like this movie really matters anyway. The next movie starts 10 years after this one. This is a story that I would want to hear from an expanded universe comic, not an episodic film. I 100% understand why this movie was hated by an entire generation who had their expectations set to Return of the Jedi levels. This movie ain't it. Once again, we have another vastly engaging film that isn't boring for 1 second. At least with this film, it felt necessary and had some really clever foreshadowing to Revenge of the Sith, but I'm not even exaggerating when I say that I literally fell asleep while watching this movie and had to rewind it. The lightsaber fights were pretty cool, but unfortunately, the entire movie isn't. And now we have reached a movie that I consider to be good. Solo has a pretty engaging plot and a lot of cool characters that I want to see more of. And good news, with the way this movie ended, it implied that a sequel with Jabba is planned. It's a shame that's never gonna happen. The problems this movie faces is that it has a lot of the cliche prequel problems, like a lot of the stuff that they did with the dice, the way Han meets Chewbacca, and the origin of the name Solo felt more like fan service stuff that doesn't really have a purpose with regard to the upcoming movies. Also, the amount of double crossing that happened at the end of this movie felt a little more pretentious than I think they were aiming for. But either way, this is a pretty cool movie that I really wish got a sequel. For the longest time, I did not like this movie for all the same reasons the cool kids don't like it. And while I still do agree with some of their criticisms, I think I've finally come to the conclusion that the good in this movie definitely outweighs the bad. Unlike The Rise of Trashwalker, this movie feels like a movie. In fact, it probably does the best job at telling its story out of most Star Wars films. There's so many minute details that all expertly come together by the end to tell this controversial but well-rounded story. The problem is that this movie is supposed to be a sequel to The Force Awakens. Just about everything set up from that movie is abandoned to tell this story, which doesn't leave a good taste in your mouth when this is the second film in the trilogy. But honestly, Rise of Skywalker is essentially a much worse version of this movie. Both movies disregard the events of the previous to try and do their own thing. The Last Jedi succeeded at telling a story at the expense of some of the canonicity of the franchise, and The Rise of Skywalker attempted to undo that movie at the expense of the movie and the entire trilogy. Also, I think some of the arguments that are made against this movie are really dumb. The biggest criticism that I take criticism with is Luke's character in this movie. Everyone claimed that his actions were out of character and Luke would never hide away from the problems of the galaxy and let the Jedi die, but Luke learns from his mistake by the end of this movie and helps the remaining resistance. Yep, that's how character arcs work. I mean, yeah, he took it a bit to the extreme, but if you really wanted, you could easily use this piece of criticism against Yoda and Obi-Wan at the end of the third movie. But anyways, I am retiring my hate for this movie. It's alright. Back in 2015, I was head over heels excited for Star Wars trademark The Force Awakens. This was the first Star Wars movie I remember ever releasing, so of course I begged my dad to take me to the first opening night showing of this film. Unfortunately, we didn't do that, but when I saw it a few days later, I fell in love with every second of it. That being said, looking back at this movie now that the sequel trilogy is behind us is kinda depressing. This movie reeks of wasted potential that could have been used to make a trilogy on par with the original. That's honestly why if you had asked me at the time, I would have said that this was my favorite Star Wars film. It was super exciting and mysterious, and you couldn't really blame it for being mysterious because it's the first one in the trilogy and you just assume that the next two movies would explain everything. But because Disney treated this movie like a product first, story second, the movie was mysterious because it didn't know what the heck it was doing. Bob Iger has admitted in his book that their first priority with this movie was to make it feel like the original trilogy, which yeah, it definitely does, but you'd assume that the same company that owns Marvel Studios, which is able to connect 24 movies and 3 Disney Plus shows together, would also spend some time trying to connect these 3 movies together. I mean, even in the way the Disney Plus description for this movie is worded really shows where their priorities lied. Experience the motion picture event of a generation in Star Wars The Force Awakens. But at the end of the day, this movie reminds me of a good time back when no one actively hated any Star Wars movies. Besides the prequels. If there's one thing that they really hit out of the ballpark with this trilogy, it's Galaxy's Edge at the Disney parks. Like, honestly, after getting to visit Batuu a second time,
Down with the First Order!
And getting to ride Rise of the Resistance, I think I misspoke in my Galaxy's Edge video. It's not the best thing to happen to the Star Wars franchise, it's the best thing to happen to the entertainment industry. Okay, maybe that's a little too far, but Rise of the Resistance at least deserves this title. I could easily make a 15-minute video about how Rise of the Resistance is the greatest thing to happen to the entertainment industry, but my Galaxy's Edge video did alright, so I don't know if anyone wants that. Let me know in the comments if that sounds interesting. Okay, Galaxy's Edge tangent done, let's move on to number 5. It's quite astonishing how little I have to say about this movie. I think it's very fun and fits into A New Hope perfectly, but I really can't think of much else to say about it. Maybe it's because the plot is pretty simple, and going into it, you already know how it's probably gonna end. The characters are funny and really cool, and yep, that's just about it. It's the best Disney Star Wars movie to date. Wait, never mind, this movie actually sucks because it retcons the Phineas and Ferb Star Wars special, which is unironically better than every movie I've discussed up to this point. Go watch it if you haven't, you won't be disappointed. Okay, here's where things start to get really good. Return of the Jedi is one of the greatest finales to one of the greatest trilogies ever. That being said, it's easily the worst of the 3 in the trilogy. The Jabba stuff at the beginning felt really weird. I suppose that was the point of it, but I don't know, I feel like it set the wrong tone for what ends up being a really epic finale. Luke literally turns himself into Vader with just a feeling that he will turn to the light side, and over time, through clever dialogue and also Palpatine frying the crap out of Luke, he does turn. It's one of the most rewarding endings and makes the entire trilogy feel like a perfect start to finish package, so long as you forget about Rise of Skywalker. This one doesn't delve too far into the deep messages and dilemmas as Empire, and it certainly isn't as fun as A New Hope. That's why it's easily the worst in the trilogy in my opinion, but you can't deny that this is an incredibly well-deserved and emotional ending to an incredible trilogy. Here we are, the one that started it all. It's so crazy to think that all these years later, after all the movies, all the merchandise, all the specials, and all the garbage, this is the movie that began all of it. Like, I don't know, maybe it's because I wasn't alive to have experienced this phenomenal film in 1977, but I think it more has to do with how bold, how confident, and how determined to build an incredible world this movie was. The hero's journey plot structure of this film works wonders for the world of this story. It helps make the audience like the characters and establish just exactly what the universe of Star Wars is. Not a second of this film drags or feels like filler. It's all super exciting start to finish. And putting this movie in the context of its time period makes it all the more obvious why everyone's so quickly attached to it. This movie came out in a time when most movies coming out were super depressing and a reflection of the Cold War reality everyone was living in. Of course, a super confident, carefree, and just great movie like Star Wars was able to hook people on for generations. I really hope this section is doing this cultural phenomenon justice, but just know that I have nothing but love for this incredible work of art that began one of my favorite franchises of all time. Wow. Just wow. Where was any of this in the other two prequels? Where were any of these emotionally charged battles? Where were any of these philosophically tough questions? Where were any of these incredible character moments that results in one of the greatest character twists in cinematic history? Every single scene in this film adds something to turning Anakin to the dark side. We see his gradual sway on screen, starting when he intimidatingly encounters Palpatine when he hears that he studied the dark side, to when he fights his mentor and best friend because he believes that his way of living is the wrong way. His turn to the dark side feels genuine because it roots from something so incredibly relatable, not wanting to lose someone. But eventually, through Palpatine's subtle persuasions, Anakin gets seduced by all of the dark side of the Force. It's so clear why Anakin would want to turn to the dark side because of how both sides are portrayed in this movie, and also because of his mistrust of the Jedi Council, which is something that's been built up since Attack of the Clones. I can't overstate how much of a jump it is to go from watching two of the most boring movies on the planet to watching this near masterpiece of a movie. I was shocked by how incredibly entertaining, emotional, and epic this movie is start to finish. It wasn't until I got to this movie on my rewatch spree that I was truly stunned by the lightsaber fights, and that most certainly has to do with the fact that I actually care about these characters now. I care about each of these characters and what they want, and I understand both sides of the dilemma now. This results in three of the most emotionally charged and epic looking lightsaber battles. If all three movies were as interesting to watch as this one, the prequel trilogy would be my favorite hands down because of how incredible a finale this film is. Whoa, what a surprise. Empire is my favorite Star Wars film. There is a reason why this movie ends up being everyone's favorite Star Wars film. It has the same excitement as A New Hope, but unlike that movie, it doesn't confine itself to the hero's journey plot structure. Instead, it tells a very specific and well-rounded story that wraps up every single detail start to finish, including something as little as Leia and Han's relationship. This movie feels very unpredictable. One minute, it feels like the heroes are in the lead, and the next, they're hiding on the side of a Star Destroyer because their hyperdrive doesn't work and they're gonna die if they fly into the open space. Luke is so confident that what he needs to do is leave Dagobah and save his friends in Cloud City. He's confident that he can save them and even face Darth Vader, only to be told the dark truth about him by his father, have his hand chopped off, and get saved by the same people that he was trying to save. This is such a difficult loss for the rebellion and the audience who is rooting for them. The movie ends with Han Solo frozen in carbonite, Luke with a prosthetic hand, and the rebellion at its weakest. It's not an ideal ending considering the last movie was such a big win for the rebellion. It's one of my favorite films of all time, and it will probably remain my favorite Star Wars film. Unless Disney gets their crap together and makes an amazing trilogy. I guess we'll see. Once again, this is all just my opinion. All Star Wars opinions are welcome in the comments. And please don't get into any mindless comment wars with someone over these movies. I really don't feel like reading an argument about whether Rey is a good or bad character. Both opinions are valid because they are yours. If you're new to this channel, hit that sub button for more high quality content. If you like this video, check out my Pixar ranked video I did a while back, and I'll see ya in Radiator Springs.